discussion this hour with Mr. John Karani, who is the chairman, Kenya Institute of Supplies Management. And our conversation today is on reopening of economies. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Great. So on to the issue of countries, especially the European countries, reopening their economies. What does this mean for Kenya and, of course, Africa by extension?
So remember, this is a ripple effect, and even if it starts in Europe, by the time it reaches Africa, who is basically a recipient kind of thing, it will take time. So what we need to do is to change our model of operation from this dependency syndrome on China, on Europe, on all that. Only thing that will help us is more our export market. But in terms of, remember, we are dealing with a demand and supply issue. So demand has started reopening in Europe, so that will affect our issues like around horticulture, around exports that go to Europe, for instance. But in terms of production within our own economies, that will still take time for us to get the inputs for our manufacturing process to ramp up that. But what I keep saying is that it will be important that we don't go back to the reopening with the mind of business as usual. We should go in that new horizon, because the tectonic plates have shifted. The environment, the operating environment has really shifted. We need to think about how do we create our own capacity eventually, as Africa, as Kenya, manufacturing capacity, our own demand, for instance. The demand of exporting to Europe is going to be there, but it will not be a sustainable way to earn our income. We need to find a way of creating local demand, regional demand, and also production. So it's a demand and supply issue. So going back to the issue of Europe, that will only help us probably to export our products to Europe, but it is not the full chain. That chain, the equation still has to continue unfolding until we get the productivity up within our own economies, so that we are not ending up being dependent on Europe alone. We have had to shift. We have to shift as economists and as business people. The shift in terms of supply base. The shift in terms of dependency on China, for instance. The shift in terms of sending all our products to Europe. That has to happen. And that, to me, is a mindset change. And that's what we really need to focus on. Mm-hmm. How do we change, calibrate, retool our mindset, our thinking, to ensure that we do not get caught on the wrong footing when this happens again. Because we live in a VUCA world. VUCA world, basically, we are talking about volatility. That's the reality of the game. Uncertainty is the reality of the world we are living in. The complexity is another uncertainty, and also the issue around ambiguity. So that's the reality we are living in. So we have to say, in this new environment, we call it VUCA environment, how do we make sure we are ahead of the game? We are not caught flat-footed the way we've been caught this time. And that means we change our mindset, we change our operating model, and change the way we think, because this dependency syndrome on Europe, on China, has to come to an end.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, but then I can start just borrowing your words. What is it that we can learn from these countries? Because we have to admit they are far ahead, compared to us. But what can we learn from them so that we stop being dependent? Because, for instance, in Kenya, we started, reopening hotels and restaurants. But just today, there's a story we ran on our 1 p.m. bulletin, and some hoteliers were saying that they're being targeted unfairly because other businesses are being required to run with minimal requirements of washing hands and wearing masks, and they're asking for the same for them. So what is it that we can learn from this developed countries, if I put it like that, even as we reopen our economy?
Excellent question. And I want to take Kenyans back to independence. At independence, Kenya, South Korea, Thailand were literally at the same level. But today, the economies of South Korea, for instance, our GDP is about 1,000 US. South Korea specifically, is around over 30,000. Thailand is around over 10,000. Well, why am I saying this? Because those economies did something that is working for them. South Korea specifically, what did they do? Specifically, they focused on a few industries within the economy, and they said, we want to develop these industries and make them scalable. That basically says that they went back to the drawing board and says, how can we create our homegrown solutions that will eventually become export solutions to the rest of the world? So what did South Korea do? They selected, I think, about 15 industries across the sectors, whether it's the food, the technology, the area. And today, South Korea is you'll find everybody having a Samsung phone or LG micro fridge phone or something from South Korea, a car. Today, you go to South Korea, you cannot import anything into South Korea because they don't need to. They've got everything that they have created within themselves. But that calls for longer-term thinking. So there will be that initial stage that we need to do immediately. What do we need to do? Survival mode, instinct. But it will be wrong to continue on how can we continue on this survival mode. It will be so crucial for our leaders, our economists, all of us in business to think longer term and see how can we prepare our economy, scale up the local industries we have today. I have a good example in Kenya, the liquid soap, the detergents. I think Turkey used to be a big importer of liquid washing soap. I forget the brand right now. It's a Turkish brand. On the shelves, that's all I was buying. Until I saw this small company in Kenya starting to create local brands that are actually very good. Another case study is Cadbury's chocolate. That's been the biggest company in Kenya in terms of chocolate for the longest time. They've been there for the longest time. And slowly by slowly, I've seen another company, which is Kenyan homegrown brand called Dairyland. And their chocolate is exactly, if not better than the Cadbury's. Nothing against Cadbury's, but why am I saying this? I'm saying that if we intentionally, deliberately, go to the drawing board and create various industries, industrial revolution, so to speak, and create our own scalable industries. So and we move those production units from being just family-owned business to become scalable in terms of publicly owned. There's something about Kenyans. We are very good in terms of brand loyalty. If you think about Safaricom, all brands that have been in Kenya, if a Kenyan sees this is made in Kenya, for Kenya, they have a way of really ramping up their support and being loyal to that brand. So I'm saying that there's a way that we can think how do we scale our local units. And Kenyans are very enterprising, extremely, across this region here. We're the most enterprising people. How can we support that entrepreneurship acumen and give the enabling environment that helps that entrepreneur that are starting as a family unit, but encourage him to attract more capital by inviting the public to participate in that industry. And before long, you'll see those small cottage industries, family-owned business, becoming publicly listed companies with all the corporate governance that you need. And before long, you'll see that Kenya will be the industrial hub in this region. We are very well placed, skilled manpower we have. The technical know-how is all we need to import. The resources we have, all we need to do is create the capital, move, and we have the capital within ourselves. How can we encourage local investment within our own region? Mm-hmm. So that, to me, is so crucial. To learn from South Korea model is one of the best things we can do. South Korea today is our top in the world, but they were not always like that. They were at the same level with Kenya at independence. They did something right. We need to borrow from that.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Now, you mentioned exports earlier, and I want us to talk about that, exports and even imports, and how we, for instance, as a country, Kenya, have been affected, and how you, in your capacity, and also as Kenya's Institute of Supplies Management, are managing it.
So let's talk about exports first of all. The export market is normally a complex, highly regulated market, and Kenya has been very dependent on exporting some few products, whether it's tea, whether it's horticultural products, some of those products that we grow, mainly agricultural products. And that market has been hit. I remember I got some friends who work in the horticultural sector, for instance. They were hit, it's almost at 30% capacity today, flower farms closing shop, all that, and they were so dependent on markets like UK, Netherlands, Europe mainly. That was overnight, just went almost down the sink. So restarting that again and making sure that we think, how do we make sure we are not so dependent on this European market only? How can we grow our homegrown demand? Keep saying economies are made up of two equations, demand and supply. Demand supply is what drives everything. So today, we have been growing the demand in Europe for our products, but we need to start saying, can we grow demand for our products locally here? And that probably means retooling what we do and finding a way of making sure, because we are, at the same time, what is sad is that much as we're importing a lot of products, we're actually importing much more. So always, we are a net importer anyway. So the thing around importation is what is a little disturbing. The other day, I was in a discussion where we were being told tomato paste is imported into Kenya. We grow a lot of tomatoes. We grow a lot of things here in Kenya. Matchsticks are imported to Kenya. Soap, I go to a hotel, you see, made in China. People, you know, the liquid soap that you have there. We can actually completely change that, and there's no reason whatsoever why we should continue being an net import country for some basic things that we can create locally. So again, it goes back to that equation, which is called supply chain. It's called input, production, and then supplies, or output. How can we make sure that we get it right from the input equation, whether it's farm products? How can we get our farmers to have the right products, the right quality products, the right juices, for instance, adding value, say, to that coconut from Mombasa, so that they are not rotting away, or the mangoes, creating mango puree, so that people don't need, our juice manufacturers do not need to import juice recipe, for instance, from outside there. We got the fruits, if not better, quality fruits. We just need to get them tooled up, producing the right quality, so that we get now the demand side of the equation, which is the manufacturing side, creating the right quality by supporting the input side of that equation, which is your farmers, to make sure they produce the right quality products to meet a rising demand, so that a Kenyan does not have any motivation to buy an imported product on the shelf, because the Kenyan product is good quality, is excellent quality, is world-class quality. So I'm saying this, that the first thing we need to do, let us create our own homegrown demand for our products, and then create the right quality so that our products, therefore, meet the standards of the local consumer first, before even think of the export market.
Okay, so let's bring it closer home and talk about supermarkets, for instance, because at the beginning of this pandemic, we witnessed people panic buying tissue papers, shopping for everything. So has business been booming for supermarkets? And even keep in mind, we also have the curfew, and most supermarkets have complied. So how has business been for various supermarkets? So
that's one area, by the way, in terms of the areas that will grow in this economy. Retail sector is one of them. Retail sector specifically around supermarket chains, because at the end of the day, I keep saying, one of the challenges that people are facing today is probably not COVID pandemic. The challenge is famine pandemic, food availability. Will there be food tomorrow? And that is one thing that the supermarkets plays a serious role in availing, especially foodstuffs, not just the tissue paper, for instance. I still have to understand why people ran out of tissue paper globally elsewhere. That's another story for another day. But we need to find out why can we not get our own supermarkets selling our products at the right quality. So supermarket chain, and there's something that's going to be very good, by the way, online trading, for instance. What this COVID has told us, it has helped us to know that much as supermarket is, the brick and mortar is important, having your four walls for people to go to, there's the bigger platform that's opening up, which is the e-commerce platform. How can we get the goods to you in your house, in the comfort of your house? With the technology that we have today, the case of Twiga Foods, for instance, and Jumuiya partnership, that's probably going to be something that will be scaling up more as people get to the comfort of their home, and say you don't need to go line up in the supermarket where there's also the risk of exposure. But that area of supermarket, in terms of the food pipeline, the food supply chain, is going to continue being crucial. And you'll see that places like Amazon, for instance, just to give a global example, Amazon, which is a big online trading line, have lost what we call that market because of this COVID thing, because the distribution network has been, in fact, impacted badly. But people are now creating the place where you can access those commodities. So there's always going to be a good balance of how do you access these goods in the supermarket, but also the option of online e-commerce is going to be growing extensively.
So I'm told we are completely out of time, but let's just get your final thoughts, your closing remarks, bearing in mind, where we are as a country, even as we continue planning to reopen our economy.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, I keep saying we are in a VUCA environment. We are in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and completely ambiguous environment. We need to change our mindset as Kenyans. Do not go back to the workplace with the same mindset that brought us here. It's not going to be business as usual. Let us rethink the way we do business, rethink our own manufacturing capability, local-driven solutions. And I know we have what it takes for Kenya to emerge stronger after this pestilence is gone. So we have what it takes to rejig ourselves, recalibrate our own capacity and capability, and create our own homegrown demand and supply to support ourselves first and then think beyond our own borders. This country, this Africa, is gifted with all the resources we need to make it. Thank you.
Indeed. Yes, we have all it takes. Thank you, sir. That was Mr. John Karani. He is the chair, Kenya Institute of Supplies Management. Thank you so much for taking your time and joining us here on